Greetings and welcome, I'm Ash, and today I would like to teach you how to beat the Mage Tower, a brand new addition to World of Warcraft that arrived in the recent patch 7.2. While it's active, it offers a variety of minor benefits such as hidden chests and additional artifact power. But most importantly of all, the ability to undergo an extremely difficult trial in order to unlock class and specialization exclusive weapon skins. As you can probably guess from the title alone, the challenge I will be guiding you through is called Closing the Eye, in which you will have to defeat not only Archmage Xylem but his demonic master as well. If you would like to try and obtain one of these fancy new cosmetics, it is important that you understand that the Mage Tower challenge is exactly what the name entails, a challenge. If you think you're going to beat it in a single attempt, or even a dozen attempts, I'm afraid you're in for a bit of a rude awakening. That said, it is not impossible, and if you come prepared, chances are high you'll be able to complete it just fine. So if you're willing to do what it takes to look downright awesome, allow me to give you a helping hand and hopefully make your journey just a little bit easier. Before you even begin thinking about attempting this challenge, you will need to gather a rather large amount of consumables, but thankfully they are mostly on the cheap side. The amount of consumables you will need will vary depending on how quickly you adapt to the fight and how much you're willing to endure in a single sitting. I would personally recommend going with 1 flask, about 20 to 30 food, 20 damage potions, 10 Drums of the Mountain if you're a class that has no access to Bloodlust, Heroism or Time Warp, 10 Defiled Augment runes to slightly boost your damage, and 10 Tomes of the Tranquil Mind which you will need for the later portion of the fight. The reason for this is that the first phase, the actual fight versus Archmage Xylem, does not require much in terms of damage, so there is no need to waste any of your precious runes or potions on it. And if you manage to get to the final phase of the battle 10 times within 2 hours, chances are you're just about to finish the whole thing anyway. So there really is no need to overspend on some of the more expensive consumables. But you should definitely grab a lot of food because you will be dying, and you will be dying a lot. As for the talents, the name of the game here is Survival. Pick the ones that amplify your healing, especially when you kill an enemy, ones that give you an extra stun or silence, and if your class has any ability that lets you jump around on a relatively low cooldown, you'll want to get that as well. Finally, you want to ensure you have at least one strong source of burst damage in order to deal with the Ice Prison, should your jump or blink ability ever be on cooldown. The first phase of the fight is really not about damage, so don't worry if you're taking defensive talents that lower your overall DPS. The only thing that matters is that you stay alive until phase 2. And finally, while this isn't necessary, and I personally haven't used it, you can also make the challenge slightly easier by installing the Deadly Boss Mods challenge pack. It gives you a bunch of helpful timers and warnings, things you don't technically need but might come in handy while you're still learning. As for the fight itself, the whole thing will begin after Xylem finishes his overly lengthy monologue. During this initial frost phase, all you will have to deal with is a constant barrage of relatively low damage frostbolts, and 3 ice prisons you will have to escape as quickly as possible. Once the battle begins, the very first thing you'll want to do is interrupt his frostbolt cast and then drag him as close to the middle as you are comfortable with. This is done in order to ensure that when you get stuck in the ice prison, you can easily spot where he is and then just jump straight to him and continue punching him in the face. If you have absolutely no mobility spells and you cannot avoid his center beams, consider dragging him to the side instead. The frostbolts aren't terribly powerful, but Xylem does pretty much chain cast them, so don't be surprised when the damage starts to stack up. In order to survive this, you will need to use a combination of interrupts, stuns, and self-healing cooldowns. Once you get a bit of experience, you shouldn't feel afraid to drop low on health during this phase, because as long as he's not about to use Ice Prison, you are going to be perfectly safe due to Frostbolt's slow and consistent damage. How exactly you'll do this frost phase is going to depend on your class, but here are some general guidelines that should work for pretty much everyone. Silence the first Frostbolt cast and pull him towards the center. Let him hit you 2 to 3 times in order to give you something to heal. Activate a self-healing cooldown or ability and completely ignore interrupts if you can maintain around 90% HP. And finally, interrupt every single spell he does right before he casts Ice Prison, because you really want to be as high on health as possible before the next step. If you've done everything correctly, you're going to find yourself imprisoned with around 70% HP. The individual shards of ice that surround you aren't very strong, and a single powerful AoE spell will pretty much clear them out. In my case, a Demon Hunter's Eye Beam is enough on its own. Things aren't as easy as they sound, however, because you'll be taking constant and very heavy damage while standing in the icy circle. And if that wasn't bad enough, if you accidentally run into one of the shards, you will die instantly. As terrifying as this sounds, the Ice Prison is not actually that hard to overcome. If you're a class that can jump or teleport, all you need to do now is find where Xylem ran away to and then simply jump over there in order to continue with the same strategy from above. I would also recommend jumping before using your dash and teleport spells, because while it might not be technically necessary, I found myself occasionally clipping the ice shards while gliding over them, dying a pointless and very lazy death. If you have spells that give you health when you kill or stun enemies, such as the Demon Hunter's AoE stun, you might want to consider killing the ice shards in order to regenerate a bit of health. This is also the way you will have to break out if you're a class with low or no mobility, such as Frost Death Knight. Simply use your strongest spells to break the ice around you, all the while leeching as much health as possible from the massive amount of shards you're killing. You're probably going to die a few times before you learn what spells to save and how to best use them, but don't worry, once you figure it out, you'll be set for good, as this whole procedure is always exactly the same. On the other hand, if you're a Demon Hunter, the Ice Prison is a complete joke, since you can not only double jump over it, but you can also use your stun to generate souls in order to heal to full. Now that is value. Once you escape the Ice Prison, chances are you'll be somewhat low on health, but again, don't panic, as Xylem's damage is slow and predictable. Just make your way towards him, interrupt him the very moment you come in range, and then drag him back towards the center just like before. The only difference this time around is that you most likely won't be able to let him hit you 2 to 3 times before healing, which means you might potentially be starting the next Ice Prison phase with very low health. This is an extremely dangerous proposition, so I would recommend carefully weaving stuns and interrupts in order to minimize incoming damage and ensure you're on high health all the time. After Xylem uses 3 Ice Prisons, the timing for the 4th one will be replaced with a transition to the Arcane phase. This transition is by far the hardest part of the encounter, and you're probably going to die quite often. So I would recommend just making your peace with that right here and now. So what happens is that Xylem, instead of using the 4th Ice Prison, teleports to a random location on the opposite side of the map, and soon begins channeling a spell that not only does a ridiculous amount of damage per second, but it also drastically slows you down, because why not? The only way to stop this is to run all the way to where he's hiding in order to hit him with an area effect spell, as he is otherwise untargetable. I've heard many people complain that they have no idea where Xylem teleports to, but I've personally found them to be rather easy to spot. All you need to do is start running to the opposite side of the map the moment he teleports away from you, and while running, simply take a glance at the minimap to find where the giant yellow circle is. That's pretty much it. If you're more of a visual type of player, however, you can also spot Xylem by a rather large amount of white sparklies that float all around them. If you're a class with high mobility, and you've previously positioned Xylem as close to the middle as possible, this phase can be done within a couple of seconds, which is kind of ironic since you're probably going to die here the most. Simply use all of your mobility and damage reduction spells in order to reach him, and then just hit him with an AoE spell before he even deals a shred of damage to you. Similarly, if you have spells that make you immune or even highly resistant to magic, you can use them to completely ignore this phase. Just don't forget that Xylem's spell not only deals heavy damage, but also slows. If you find yourself messing up, or if you have no mobility spells to rely on, you'll have to do this the old-fashioned way. Once Xylem teleports away, the entire room will be filled with clones, all slowly channeling a spell that bounces you around. These illusions don't have a lot of health, and they can be interrupted, so pick the furthest one you can reach safely and just nuke it down as fast as possible. Once dead, these illusions will drop a rapidly shrinking shield that lets you ignore Xylem's damage and refresh your cooldowns. While you're safely inside the bubble, you should pick which illusion you're going to go for next and slowly start whittling its health down from range. After that is done, all you need to do is take a stroll to the next bubble and repeat the process until you eventually reach Xylem. All of this sounds very simple, and in reality it really is, but there are a lot of ways to mess up and die almost instantly. So if you are not sure if you can reach Xylem before the damage and slow start ticking in, just err on the side of caution and jump from illusion to illusion. It is going to take you a bit longer, but again, there is no big DPS check you need to worry about. Just make sure you actually stay alive. Once you hit Xylem with an AoE attack, he will immediately begin channeling the very slow but insanely powerful Arcane Barrage. It is going to be very tempting to interrupt it as soon as possible, but I'm afraid you're going to have to keep your instant interrupt on standby for later. The reason for this is a spell called Draw Power, which Xylem seems to cast completely at random. And if you don't interrupt it instantly, and I really do mean instantly, it will give him a stacking damage buff that will almost surely spell your doom. As such, you will need to interrupt the Arcane Barrage with stuns, incapacitates, or any other tricks your class has access to. Every time you interrupt an Arcane Barrage, you should also move slightly backward, because Xylem will follow you for around 1 second before resuming his casting. Much like the Ice Prison phase, this will greatly help you with events to come, as you'll be in a much better position and much quicker to react. As I mentioned before, these Arcane Barrage spells are very slow to cast, so if your class has some particularly strong healing cooldowns, you might be able to completely ignore their damage and just heal yourself in between each cast, only occasionally throwing out a stun to buy yourself some time. If you do decide to stun and interrupt his Arcane Barrage, just make sure you do it near the very end of his cast in order to gain as much time as humanly possible. That said, don't drop down too low on health, because he will eventually teleport after 5 to 6 casts, and it would be really silly for you to die just because you got a bit too comfortable. Besides Arcane Barrage, Xylem will also try to kill you with Shadow Barrage, which is an uninterruptible spell that creates hordes of little shadows that spawn in the distance and then shoot down a straight line. Basically, it is an evil version of the Hunter's Stampede spell. Unless you use a powerful defensive cooldown, these shadows will instantly kill you on contact. But they are surprisingly easy to dodge, so I honestly wouldn't really worry much about them. That said, all you really need to do is stand slightly behind Xylem, away from where the shadows are spawning from, and use this little bit of downtime to heal up and refresh your cooldowns. If you find yourself having trouble with this particular spell, feel free to completely avoid its area effect and just have a sip of coffee while you wait for him to finish. Again, it is not a DPS race. All that matters is that you stay alive. Once Xylem attempts to cast around 5 to 6 spells, he will most likely teleport to the other side of the map, which is then immediately followed by another Arcane Barrage. If you've slowly moved him towards the center, as I've instructed you above, this should be nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Simply find where he teleported to, walk over there, and just interrupt the extremely slow Arcane Barrage before it chops off 50% of your HP. But again, just make sure you don't panic and use your standard interrupt spell while walking towards him, because you can never really tell when he's going to use Draw Power, and if you let it channel for even a second, you're going to be in for a world of trouble. After 2 to 3 teleports, Xylem will once again enter the transitional phase by teleporting to the opposite side of the map and becoming all sparkly. As such, it is of the utmost importance that you pull him towards the center as often and as frequently as you possibly can. If you need to trek from one side of the map to the other, there is a high chance you might mess up, which means you will die. But if all you need to do is one single jump from the middle, then you might just be able to completely skip this entire phase. So make sure to practice your pulling because it will make your life much easier. The second and all future frost phases are slightly more difficult than the one you started out with. Almost all of the mechanics are exactly the same, but instead of teleporting a couple of meters away, Xylem will teleport to the other side of the map each time it puts you in the ice prison. This doesn't really change anything in terms of how you execute your strategy, but you will need to be much more careful with how and when you use your interrupts. I would recommend saving a long-range stun right before you get stuck in the ice prison, purely so that you can interrupt the frostbolt spam as soon as you are free. The one new addition to this phase is that Xylem now also casts Shadow Barrage, which is again an amazing boon since it gives you plenty of time to heal up and take a nice refreshing drink. The strategy is the same as the Arcane phase, but since you're pulling Xylem towards the middle much quicker, you will have a lot less room to work with. It is slightly more difficult than before, and you can occasionally find yourself cornered, but as long as you don't make massive risks, you'll be perfectly fine. The entire battle against Xylem is a constant repeat of Frost, Transition, and Arcane until he reaches 10% health. While you might feel compelled to use all of your strongest spells when you see him on low health, I would strongly advise you to do no such thing because you will need all of your DPS cooldowns for phase 2. Instead, finish off Xylem by using as little of your resources as possible, and with as high of a health pool as you can manage. If you were forced to use your big 5-minute cooldown earlier in the fight and it still hasn't recovered, consider delaying the kill for as long as you can because every little bit of DPS will be of great use later on. Once Xylem drops to around 10% HP, he will run to a predetermined point on the map and begin talking for around 30 seconds. It is now that you should use your Defiled Augment rune to slightly boost your damage, and the Tome of the Tranquil Mind to respec into a primarily single target focused build. You might occasionally get stuck in combat because Blizzard is being very lazy when it comes to fixing this bug, which will delay your respec by around 10 seconds, so do make sure you can pick your talents and set your spells as quickly as possible. You can practice this whole procedure in front of the Mage Tower as it's considered a rest area, and I would strongly suggest you do just that, because you can never predict how buggy the challenge is going to be, so you really have to act fast. If you are a class that doesn't have much AoE in its base kit, consider grabbing 1 or 2 AoE talents just to make sure you can deal with the upcoming adds. If you are decently geared, let's say around 900 item level, chances are you won't have much trouble with the adds. And this goes doubly so for those among you that have good legendaries, but it is as always nice to have a safeguard. The battle in phase 2 is against a single demon that doesn't do anything special itself. The actual dangerous part of this fight is the corrupted ground the boss leaves underneath him, because it will eventually cover the entire zone and kill you rather quickly. In order to avoid this, you will need to constantly drag the boss forward, always slightly ahead of the corrupted ground. The best way I've found to do this is to start with the boss spawns, then slowly drag him to the edge of the map and then go very slowly in a circle. In order to ensure you're still dealing damage to the boss while running away, you should also move him in a sort of a diagonal. As before, you're probably going to mess up a few times before all of this clicks, but once you figure it out, you'll be able to kite him around quite easily, because honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Just make sure you only move him when the corrupted ground is nearly upon you. because if you move the boss too quickly, you're going to find yourself with very little room to work with. Besides the Corrupted Ground, the only other ability the boss has is a channel spell that puts a short debuff on you, which when it expires spawns 3 ads that you absolutely need to kill before they reach the boss. There is no way to avoid this, so do not interrupt this channel. What you should do is continue dealing damage to the boss for as long as possible, and when you have around 3 seconds left on your debuff, you should jump or teleport as far away as you can. If you have no mobility spells available, however, you should start moving a few seconds earlier, just to be on the safe side. Once the debuff reaches 0, 3 demons will spawn directly around you and soon start moving towards the boss. They are completely immobile for the first second after they spawn, so take this opportunity to set up some ground-based AoE and deal heavy damage. Once they start moving, you should use your AoE stuns and slows in order to prevent them from reaching the boss. And that's pretty much it as far as strategy goes. It's all about doing as much AoE damage as possible in as little time as possible. If you are under-geared, you might find this portion of the fight nearly impossible, in which case I'm afraid you're simply going to have to admit defeat and farm out a bit of gear before trying again. The same applies to the boss itself, given that he is entirely a DPS check. There are ways to make this slightly easier, and I will note them in a second, but if you find yourself consistently running out of room and the boss is like 40% HP, you might need a bit more gear before you're truly ready. In order to dish out the most damage onto the demon, you should use a potion before the battle even begins. So that way you'll be able to use 2 potions throughout the entire fight. The first one you should chug while Xylem is halfway through is "Hold them off!" as this signals the start of the encounter. As soon as the demon starts moving, you should activate your Drums of the Mountain, your strongest DPS cooldowns, and then go completely berserk, as this is your only time you won't have to move. Eventually, the Corrupted Ground will creep in and you will be forced to move, but make sure to prioritize getting as much damage in as possible, given that this is your largest burst window by far. As for the second potion, you'll be using it around 2 minutes into the fight when the second pair of ads spawn. Try and kill them by using as few DPS cooldowns as you can, mostly relying on the power of your DPS potion to carry you. And once you're done with the ads, you should go ham on the boss with your newly refreshed 2-minute cooldowns and last bit of potion. There really is nothing else to it. If you're capable of dealing a decent amount of damage, let's say 600 to 700k DPS buff, and you can maintain a cool head in order to kite the demon around, you'll be able to kill the final boss within a couple of attempts. He really isn't that difficult. If you try to do it under gear like me, you might run out of room and be forced to fight him in the Corrupted Ground for a couple of seconds. But as long as you save some sort of defensive cooldown, you should be able to survive through this as well. The one last piece of advice I can give you is to honestly not worry about your failures. Even extremely good players with extremely good gear have died quite a few times before mastering the Mage Tower. So just believe in yourself and keep pushing forward. You will get there eventually, and when you do, it will be the very best feeling in the entire world. Thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know. And with that said, I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you soon.